I was in the middle of making soup when my daughter-in-law, Dawn, whacked me on the head with a ladle. "Who cooks like that, you incompetent fool?" she shrieked, and I felt the searing heat of the metal against my temple. My son, Robert, who was relaxing in the living room, simply cranked up the volume on the TV, as if he hadn't heard a thing, as if none of it mattered. 5 minutes later, a deafening crash erupted from the kitchen. Pots, pans, dishes, and then the sickening thud of my own body hitting the floor. Robert rushed in and froze in the doorway, his face a mask of disbelief. "Mom, what have you done?" he whispered, staring at me sprawled amidst the wreckage of what was left of my dignity. But what neither of them realized in that moment was that I still held one last card, a secret weapon, if you will. A card that was about to change everything. My name is Helen. I'm 71 years old, with hands toughened by decades of baking bread for others and a heart that, until recently, had an unwavering belief in the sanctity of family. What a naive fool I'd been. So utterly blind. 6 months ago, I buried my husband, Henry. 50 years of marriage simply vanished one April afternoon when his heart gave out as he was watering the geraniums in the backyard. I found him there on his knees, the hose still lazily dripping water onto his brown shoes. Since that day, my world had shrunk to a silent existence filled with yellowing photographs. I was all alone in a house that suddenly felt too big, haunted by memories that stung to the touch. Robert, my only son, had insisted that I move in with him and his wife. "You can't be alone, Mom. At your age, it's dangerous," he'd said over the phone, sounding genuinely concerned. I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. I sat there on that park bench, surrounded by my suitcases, clutching the proof that I was not the destitute, helpless woman everyone saw passing by. I was the owner of an estate valued at millions of dollars. Millions. And I had been sleeping on the street, eating from garbage cans, begging for scraps. The irony was so brutal that I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I did both. I laughed like a madwoman as tears streamed down my filthy cheeks. Passers-by stared at me with pity and fear, steering clear of the crazy old woman in the park. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Or maybe I still was, but now I knew something they didn't. I rummaged through my belongings until I found a payphone that actually worked. I dialed the number for the lawyer, Roger Mendes, my fingers trembling. It rang 3 times before a professional voice answered. "Mendes and Associates Law Firm. How may I help you?" "I need to speak with the lawyer, Roger Mendes. It's about Henry Salazar." My voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, from weeks of disuse. There was a pause. "Who is speaking, please?" "I am Helen Salazar, Henry's widow." Another pause, longer this time. "Mrs. Salazar? We have been trying to contact you for months. Where are you? Mr. Mendes urgently needs to see you." I gave them the park's address. They told me they would send a car in less than 30 minutes. I returned to my bench and waited, clutching those documents as if they were the only real things left in the world. Maybe they were. The car that arrived was black, sleek, with tinted windows. The driver got out and looked at me with a neutral, professional expression, as if picking up homeless women was just another part of his daily routine. "Mrs. Salazar?" I nodded. He loaded my suitcases into the trunk and opened the back door for me. The interior smelled of leather and expensive air freshener. I felt dirty and out of place, but I didn't care anymore. That was the truth that stung more than any physical blow. Her son had stopped caring about her long before he forced her from his home. Perhaps he had never truly cared. Perhaps he had only perceived her as an obligation, an inherited burden that he had finally discovered a means to discard. On the 28th day of the eviction period, Roger called. Robert paid. He somehow managed to get the money. He paid the full $6,200 this morning. Helen felt a pang of something akin to disappointment. Where did he get the money? I'm not certain, but I have a theory. There's a new charge on the credit report I monitor. A personal loan from a quick loan company with a 32% interest rate. He likely borrowed from them. 32% interest. Robert has traded one debt for an even more crippling one. He has bought himself some time, but He hasn't solved anything. I understand. Continue to monitor the situation. Notify me of any changes. 2 weeks later, the next rent payment was due, or rather, it didn't arrive. Robert was late again. This time, Helen didn't hesitate. Initiate the eviction process immediately, she instructed Roger. No additional warnings. We apply the rules to the letter. While these legal and financial machinations unfolded, Helen continued her personal transformation. She signed up for yoga classes in the mornings, not solely for the physical benefits, although they were certainly welcome, but because she needed to learn to be still with herself, to breathe, to exist without the incessant clamor of serving others.
She also began to write.
She purchased a brown leather notebook and an elegant pen, and she wrote every night before bed. It wasn't precisely a diary, but rather a collection of reflections and thoughts about who she had been, who she was now, and who she aspired to become. She wrote about Henry, about their years together, about the things she had never articulated to him. Was that what I had wanted? I had spent weeks moving pieces, pulling strings, applying pressure. I had watched my son fall apart piece by piece. And now that he was here in front of me, completely broken, did I feel satisfied? No, I finally said, surprised by my own answer. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted you to understand what it feels like to be discarded, ignored, treated as if you're worth nothing. I wanted you to hit rock bottom so you could start rebuilding yourself correctly. And did I achieve it? He asked, his voice barely audible. I hit rock bottom. What do you think? I considered the question for a long moment. I think so. I think I can't fall any lower than I am now. No job, no wife, no money, no home, no dignity. Without you. The last 2 words came out as a torn whisper. I remained silent, letting his words hang in the air between us. Robert had reached the bottom. I could see it in his eyes, in the way his shoulders slumped, in how his hands trembled on his knees. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment my son finally understood the weight of his actions. Do you know what the worst part of it all was, Robert? I finally said. It wasn't the blow with the ladle. It wasn't sleeping on the street. It wasn't searching for food in the garbage. It was the sound of the television volume going up. It was knowing that my own son heard me cry out in pain and chose to do nothing. He sobbed, covering his face with his hands.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
If I could go back in time. But you can't, I interrupted him. No one can. We can only decide what to do with the time we have left. Robert looked up, hope and fear mingled in his expression.
What?
What's going to happen now? I leaned back in the chair, studying him. My son, the baby I had carried in my arms, the child who ran to me when he fell, the teenager who hugged me before going off to college. So, I packed my entire life into 4 suitcases and left behind the house where I'd raised my son, where Henry and I used to dance in the kitchen on Sundays, where every nook and cranny held fragments of our shared life. Robert's house was ultramodern, all gleaming floors and furniture that looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. Dawn, my daughter-in-law, greeted me with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Welcome, Helen, she said, pointedly omitting mother-in-law, or even mom. Just Helen, as if I were some casual acquaintance. From day one, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake, but it felt too late to turn back. I settled into the guest room, a small, depressing space at the end of the hall with a window that offered a view of a dark, uninviting alley. I hung Henry's photographs on the wall, neatly arranged my drab gray dresses in the closet, and tried to make myself as invisible as possible. That was my new role, to exist without being in the way. Morning started early. I was up at 6 a.m., brewing coffee, making breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, freshly squeezed orange juice. Robert would come down first, always in a rush, his eyes glued to his phone. Thanks, Mom, he'd mumble without even looking up. Dawn would appear later, draped in a green silk robe, her hair perfectly styled, even at that ungodly hour. She'd sit at the table and dissect every detail of my efforts with a critical eye. The coffee is weak, she'd declare. The eggs are too salty. Never a thank you, Never a word of appreciation. I just nodded, smiled weakly, and tried harder the next day. I so desperately wanted to be useful, to be needed, to believe that I still had a place in my son's life. Days bled into weeks. I cleaned, cooked, did laundry. I became a shadow flitting through the house, picking up crumbs, folding towels, tidying spaces that no one else even noticed. Dawn worked from home, always on important calls, constantly stressed. The law firm was located in the financial district, in one of those gleaming glass skyscrapers that reflected the sky. We rode up in a silent elevator to the 15th floor. The receptionist scrutinized me from head to toe, but said nothing. She simply gestured down a hallway. Mr. Mendes is waiting for you in his office. Roger Mendes was a man in his 50s with perfectly combed gray hair and thin-rimmed glasses. He stood as I entered, and for a fleeting moment, I saw surprise flicker across his face at my disheveled state. He quickly composed himself, however, and replaced it with a professional demeanor. Mrs. Salazar, please have a seat. May I offer you some water, coffee? Water, please. My voice was barely audible. He poured a glass from a crystal carafe and handed it to me. I drank it as if I hadn't had water in days, which, in a way, was true. Mrs. Salazar, we have been trying to locate you ever since Mr. Henry passed away. I left messages at your old house, sent letters, she explained. Your son told us you had moved, but he couldn't or wouldn't provide us with a forwarding address. A wave of bitterness washed over her as she continued. My son. My own son kicked me out of his house 3 weeks ago. I've been living on the street ever since. The lawyer's brow furrowed with concern. I understand, Mrs. Salazar. I am very sorry to hear that. But I want you to know that your financial situation is remarkably sound. Your husband was an exceptionally foresightful man. Have you had a chance to review the documents he left for you? Helen retrieved the wrinkled envelope from her purse, placing it carefully on the desk. I found these yesterday. I don't understand everything they say. Roger examined the papers with a practiced eye. I see. These are duplicates. I have the certified originals here. Allow me to explain your current situation, Mrs. Salazar. She wrote about Robert, about motherhood, and about how love is sometimes insufficient. One afternoon, while writing on the hotel terrace, an elderly woman sat down at the table beside hers. She appeared to be in her 80s, or perhaps even older, with perfectly styled white hair and piercing blue eyes. Excuse me for intruding, she said softly, but I've noticed you sitting here several times, always writing, always alone. And you remind me of myself some years ago. Helen smiled politely, bracing herself for a sales pitch or a sermon, but the woman simply continued. I also experienced a late-life transformation. After my husband passed away, I discovered that I didn't know who I was without him. I had been a wife, a mother, a grandmother, but never simply myself. So I had to learn. Is that your situation, too? Her words struck Helen with unnerving accuracy. Something like that, she admitted. The difficult part isn't discovering who you are, the woman said, gazing out toward the horizon. The difficult part is giving yourself permission to be that person, particularly when the person you discover is not who others expect you to be. She turned her gaze directly to Helen. But it's worth it, completely worth it. She stood, patted Helen on the shoulder, and walked away. Helen never learned her name, nor did she ever see her again, but her words lingered, resonating deeply within her. She was right. The difficult part wasn't discovering who Helen was without Henry, without Robert, without the role of the self-sacrificing mother. The difficult part was granting herself permission to be that person, a person who collected what she was owed, a person who didn't automatically forgive, a person who established boundaries and enforced them. The eviction process progressed inexorably. Roger provided her with updates every 2 days. Robert had engaged a low-cost lawyer who was attempting to uncover technicalities to delay the inevitable. All of that was still there, buried beneath bad decisions and cowardice. But there was also the man who had betrayed me. Both versions were real. The eviction proceeds, I said firmly. I am not going to cancel it. You need to leave that apartment. You need to leave that life behind. His face crumbled. I understand. I have no right to ask you for anything.
Just.
Can I ask you something? Where were you all those months? How did you survive before you discovered the properties? I told him, not everything, but enough. The nights in the park, the hunger, the cold, the machine that swallowed my last dollars. Every word was a dart that I watched strike its target. He needed to hear it. He needed to understand the full cost of his abandonment. When I finished, Robert was openly weeping, not trying to hide it. I failed you in the worst possible way. Dad must be ashamed of me. Wherever he is, he must hate me for what I did to you. Your father loved you, I said softly, even when you made mistakes. But he also knew that real love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their actions. That's why he built this legacy for me, so I would have the resources to defend myself if I ever needed to. Will you ever forgive me? The question hung in the air. The truth was, I didn't know. I don't know, Robert. Forgiveness isn't something I can force. It's not a switch I flip because you finally apologized. It's a process. And first, I need to see real change, not just pretty words born of desperation. He nodded, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. What can I do? How can I show you I've changed? It's not about showing me anything. It's about you becoming the man you want to be, the man your father would have been proud to call his son. I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. You have 2 days to vacate. Use that time wisely. Robert rose slowly, as if every movement required immense effort. He reached the door, then stopped and turned back. Whenever something went wrong in her day, I became the easiest target. Why did you leave this here? She'd snap, pointing to a cup I'd forgotten on the side table. Can't you do anything right? Robert was always present during these tirades, but he never intervened. He just looked the other way, as if it wasn't his problem, as if I wasn't his mother. There were nights when I lay awake, listening to the incessant ticking of the wall clock. I wondered what I'd done wrong. Where had I failed as a mother? Why did my son allow me to be treated this way? Silent tears would stream down my face, and I'd quickly wipe them away before dawn, determined not to show any weakness, not to give them any excuse to get rid of me. But then came that afternoon, the day I was preparing the vegetable soup that Robert had adored as a child. Something inside me finally snapped. I was carefully chopping carrots, focused on making everything perfect, when Dawn stormed into the kitchen like a hurricane. What are you doing? She demanded, her voice laced with that familiar, grating sharpness. Soup for dinner, I replied softly, not even turning around. Robert's favorite recipe. She moved closer, peered into the pot, and her face contorted in disgust. This looks like pig slop. How much salt did you put in? Are you trying to poison us? Her words were like daggers. I tried to explain, but she wouldn't listen. She grabbed the ladle from the pot and, before I could react, slammed it against my head. The blow stunned me. I felt the searing heat of the metal, the scalding liquid trickling down my hair, the sharp, throbbing pain in my temple. Who cooks like that, you incompetent hag? Dawn screamed, her voice echoing throughout the house. I stumbled, clutching the edge of the stove for support. From the living room, I could hear the television blaring. Robert was in there. He could hear everything, and he simply turned up the volume. That was the moment something inside me died. You are the owner of 13 properties within the city limits, with a total estimated value of approximately $8 million. In addition to that, you have investments in various funds and stocks worth another $2 million. And your husband also left you 3 bank accounts containing readily accessible cash, about $500,000, all told. The numbers seemed to hang in the air, surreal and unbelievable. $10 million. $10 million, she repeated, almost to herself. And I've been searching for food in dumpsters. Her voice dropped to a whisper. This can't be real. It is completely real, Mrs. Salazar, Roger assured her. And there's something else you should know. One of the buildings you own is located on Magnolia Street at number 452. According to our records, your son, Robert Salazar, and his wife, Dawn, reside in apartment 301 of that building. That's correct, she confirmed, nodding slowly. That's correct. Then you should also be aware that they have been living there under a reduced rent contract that your husband granted them 5 years ago. They are paying a mere $400 a month for an apartment that would typically rent for $2,500 on the open market. It was a family favor, a gesture of goodwill from Mr. Henry. $400, she echoed, a hard edge creeping into her voice. Robert was living in a luxury apartment for next to nothing, thanks to his father's generosity, and he had thrown her out on the street, left her with nothing. The lawyer continued, explaining details about taxes and property management, but Helen found it difficult to focus. Her mind was grappling with something else entirely. Can I cancel that contract? She asked abruptly, interrupting him mid-sentence. Roger paused, giving her his full attention. You are the owner, Mrs. Salazar. You have the right to do whatever you wish with your properties. However, there are certain legal procedures we must follow. You can't simply evict them without proper notice. I don't want to evict them. They argued that the rent increase had been excessive, that certain protocols hadn't been followed, that they deserved more time. But Roger had been meticulous, ensuring that everything was done precisely by the book. Every document was in order. Every notification had been correctly delivered. There was no escape. The eviction hearing is scheduled for next Thursday, Roger informed her one afternoon. It's essentially a formality. Given the documentation we have, the judge will rule in our favor. Your son will be required to vacate the premises within a maximum of 10 days following the ruling. I'll be there, Helen announced abruptly. Roger raised his eyebrows in surprise. At the hearing? It's not necessary, Mrs. Salazar. I can fully represent you. In fact, it's preferable that you not be present. It maintains your anonymity. I want to be there in the room, but not as an involved party, simply as an observer. You can, he considered for a moment. Eviction hearings are public record. Anyone can enter and sit in the back. As long as they don't recognize you, there's no problem. Thursday dawned under a gray sky threatening rain. Helen dressed with care, selecting a dark gray pantsuit and an ivory silk blouse. She swept her hair back into a low bun and put on her new glasses, applying a subtle touch of makeup. She studied her reflection in the mirror and saw a woman Robert wouldn't recognize. She was no longer the stooped mother cooking soup in his kitchen. She was someone else, someone stronger. The courthouse was an aging structure with hallways redolent of old paper and stale coffee. She arrived early and took a seat on the last bench in courtroom 3, where the hearing was scheduled to take place. There were other people waiting for their respective cases, all bearing that anxious, weary expression that the legal system seemed to induce. Mom, one last thing. When I find somewhere to stay, when I manage to get my life sorted out, can I call you? Even if it's just to know you're okay. I considered my answer carefully. You can try, but I don't guarantee I'll answer. Not until I see actions, not just words. He nodded, accepting the terms. Thank you for seeing me, for listening to me. I know I didn't deserve it. And then he left. I was left alone in the office, feeling the weight of what had just transpired. It hadn't been the explosive confrontation I might have imagined. There were no screams or dramatic rejections, just the cold, hard truth served on a platter of inevitable consequences. The following days were spent in a kind of emotional limbo. Roger informed me that Robert had vacated the apartment one day before the deadline. He had left the place clean and handed over the keys properly. According to the building doorman, he had left in a taxi with only 3 suitcases and an expression of utter defeat. Do you know where he went? I asked, hating myself for asking. No, Mom, he didn't say. A part of me wanted to investigate, to find out where he was, to make sure he at least had a roof over his head, but I held back. Robert was an adult. He needed to sort this out himself. I couldn't keep rescuing him. Dawn, for her part, had completely disappeared. According to my sources, she had moved back in with her parents in another city, blaming Robert for everything. She had posted things on social media about weak men and wasted time, but never mentioned her own role in the disaster.
Typical.
With the apartment vacant, I decided to make some changes. I hired a designer, and we completely renovated the space, New floors, fresh paint, modern appliances. Apartment 301 became the jewel of the building. I rented it in less than a week to a young professional for $3,000 a month. But the building wasn't the only thing that needed renovation. I did, too. The physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing betrayal of that silence. My son, the boy I carried in my womb, the one I raised with every ounce of love I possessed, had chosen the mindless entertainment of a TV show over my suffering. I stood there, leaning against the stove, the ladle still dripping soup at my feet. Dawn glared at me with eyes full of contempt, waiting for me to apologize, to grovel, to beg her forgiveness for the crime of existing. But all I could think about was Robert, the way the television volume had spiked just as she screamed, how he knew exactly what was happening and chose to ignore it. "You're pathetic," Dawn spat, crossing her arms. "Look at this mess. You can't even make a damn soup. I don't know why Robert insisted on bringing you here. You're a burden, a useless old woman just taking up space." Each word was like a slap in the face. I wanted to retort, to defend myself, but my voice was trapped, lost somewhere deep in my throat. I tried to clean up, to wipe the splattered soup from the floor, but my hands were shaking uncontrollably. My head throbbed where the ladle had struck me. Dawn flounced out of the kitchen, leaving me alone amidst the steam and the silence. 5 minutes. That was all it took for me to reach a decision. I looked at the pots lined up on the stove, at the dishes piled in the drainer, at the kitchen I had cleaned every day for months, desperately trying to earn a place in this house that would never truly be mine. And something inside me simply exploded. It wasn't planned. It wasn't calculated. It was pure, unadulterated survival instinct. I grabbed the largest pot, the one filled with the soup she had so cruelly mocked, and dumped it into the sink. The hot liquid gurgled down the drain with an almost violent sound. Then I grabbed another pot and another. I hurled them, some crashing onto the floor, others slamming against the kitchen counter. The plates slipped from my trembling hands. "Not yet," she said, the words coming out cold and deliberate. "I want them to adjust their rent to the market price. $2,500. Have them pay that." The lawyer nodded slowly. "That is certainly within your rights. We would need to notify them 30 days in advance of the change in contract terms. Are you sure you wish to proceed?" "Completely sure." Roger made a note on his computer. "Very well. I will prepare the necessary documents. Now, Mrs. Salazar, there are more immediate matters we must address, such as your housing situation. You have several options. You could move into any of your unoccupied properties, or I can help you find temporary accommodations while you decide what to do. I want to see the other buildings, all of them. I want to know exactly what I own." "Of course. We can organize visits starting tomorrow. In the meantime, allow me to arrange a hotel room for you, an appropriate place where you can rest and recover." He stood and made a quick call. Within minutes, arrangements were finalized. A 5-star hotel downtown, an executive suite, all paid for from her account. Before she left, Roger handed her a bank card. "This has access to one of your checking accounts. There's $50,000 available for immediate expenses. Use what you need. And Mrs. Salazar, there's one more thing. Your husband asked me to tell you something, should you ever come to see me under difficult circumstances. He made me promise." He retrieved a sealed envelope from a drawer. He told me verbatim, "If my Helen comes to you beaten down by life, give her this and tell her that I always knew she was stronger than she thought she was." Helen took the envelope, her hands no longer trembling quite so much. She opened it in front of Roger. It was another letter from Henry, shorter than the first, written in black ink on heavy paper. "My love," it began. Asterisk, if you are reading this, it means someone has hurt you badly enough that you sought help. "I know your pride." Robert arrived 15 minutes before the scheduled time, accompanied by Dawn and their lawyer, a young man in a suit that had seen better days. Her son looked terrible. He had lost weight and had deep, dark circles under his eyes. His hair was unkempt. Dawn, conversely, was impeccably groomed in an emerald green dress that seemed excessively elegant for a courthouse setting. Her high heels clicked on the floor, and her makeup was flawless, but her expression was one of barely contained fury. They sat in the front row, their backs to her. Helen observed them as one might watch a play, detached and analytical. Dawn whispered something into Robert's ear, gesturing emphatically, clearly exasperated. He merely nodded, defeated, without the energy to argue. Their lawyer reviewed documents, with a concerned look on his face. Roger arrived precisely on time, immaculate in his black suit, his leather briefcase in hand. He didn't acknowledge Helen, as they had agreed. He sat on the other side, organized and confident. He knew his business, and he knew he had a strong case. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with a severe expression and efficient movements. Case number 3478, Mendoza Enterprises versus Robert Salazar, the clerk announced, breaking the courtroom silence. Robert's lawyer was quick to his feet, launching into an argument that the rent increase was exorbitant and unfair. He emphasized his client's 5-year residency and consistent payment history, suggesting he deserved special consideration. Yet, even to his own ears, his arguments lacked conviction, a silent acknowledgement of defeat. Roger rose with a quiet confidence. He presented the evidence, the original contract, notifications of the rent increase, and records of late payments, all meticulously organized. He explained that the preferential rent had been a courtesy extended by the previous owner, now deceased. I decided it was time to leave the hotel and create a real home. I chose one of my properties, a small house in a quiet neighborhood with a south-facing garden. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with large windows, and a wooden deck perfect for enjoying the mornings.
I spent weeks decorating it. I didn't hire designers this time.
I wanted to do it myself. I chose simple but elegant furniture. I hung Henry's photographs in the living room, but I also left space for new memories. I planted roses in the garden, tomatoes in pots, and aromatic herbs next to the kitchen window. I enrolled in painting classes at a nearby community center. It turned out I wasn't terrible. My first attempts were disastrous, blobs of color, without shape or meaning. But over time, I started creating things I liked, simple landscapes, still lives, self-portraits that captured who I was becoming. I also started volunteering at the shelter I had tried to visit that terrible night when I had nowhere to go. I served food twice a week. I listened to the stories of other homeless people, understanding that each one had their own path to despair. I donated generously, but I also gave something more valuable, my time and my empathy. One afternoon while serving soup, I recognized someone. It was the man who had offered me bread that night in the park. He looked cleaner now, more hopeful. "Grandma," he said, surprised. "Is that you? You look different." "I am," I replied, smiling. I found myself. 3 months passed without any news from Robert. He didn't call.
He didn't write. Part of me was relieved.
Another part felt his absence like a wound that refused to heal. But I kept going. I continued building my life, discovering who Helen was beyond being a mother, a wife, a shadow. Then one Saturday morning while I was watering the roses, my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello, Mom." Robert's voice, but different, firmer. "It's me." The cup shattered. Cutlery flew through the air. It was a chaotic, liberating, utterly necessary clamor. I heard Robert's hurried footsteps. "What was that?" he shouted from the hallway. When he reached the kitchen, he stopped dead in his tracks. His face paled as he took in the scene. Me, surrounded by overturned pots, spilled soup, and shards of broken dishes. A trickle of blood ran down my temple where the ladle had struck me. "Mom, what have you done?" he whispered, but he didn't come any closer. He didn't touch me. He just stared at me as if I were solely to blame for the chaos. Dawn appeared behind him, her expression of horror quickly morphing into fury. "She's crazy. Your mother is completely insane," she shrieked, pointing at me as if I were some dangerous animal. "Look at this mess. She destroyed my entire kitchen."
"Call someone."
"Robert, this woman needs to be locked up." Robert looked at me. I returned his gaze, silently pleading with him to say something, to defend me, to at least ask why I had done this. But he just shook his head, his face etched with disappointment and shame.
Mom, why?
Why do you do these things?
Why?
Your wife hit me with a boiling ladle, Robert. I retorted, my voice raw and broken. She hit me, and you just turned up the television volume. The words came out like sharpened knives. He blinked, confused, or perhaps feigning confusion. I didn't hear it, Mom. I didn't know what. Liar, I spat. The word hung between us like a poisonous cloud. You were there. You heard everything, and you chose to do nothing. Dawn stepped between us, her face flushed with rage. I won't tolerate this. I won't live under the same roof as this ungrateful old woman who respects nothing. Robert, you have to choose. Either she leaves or I do. The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. I know how hard it is for you to ask for anything, but I want you to know one thing. I built all of this for you. Every property, every investment, every penny saved was thought of for the day when I would be gone, and you would need to defend yourself. Don't let anyone, not even our own blood, make you feel small. You're a giant, Helen. You always were. Now prove it. Tears streamed down her face as she read. Roger tactfully looked away, pretending to review paperwork. She carefully folded the letter and tucked it away with the other. Henry had known. Somehow, he had known that one day she would need this, that she would need a shield, armor, a castle of her own. The hotel was everything her life had ceased to be. Soft carpets, sheets that smelled faintly of lavender, a bathroom with a marble tub. She stood in the middle of the suite for several minutes, simply taking it all in. It seemed unreal. 24 hours ago, she had been sleeping on a park bench. Now, she was in a room that cost $300 a night. The first thing she did was draw a bath. She filled the tub with steaming water and submerged herself completely. The water clouded and darkened with weeks of accumulated grime. She scrubbed her skin until it was raw, washed her hair 3 times, trying to eradicate every trace of the streets from her body. When she finally emerged, she wrapped herself in a plush white robe that hung behind the door. It was so soft, it almost made her weep again. She ordered room service. Soup, freshly baked bread, roast chicken, salad, dessert. When the food arrived on a cart draped with a white tablecloth, she sat down and ate slowly, savoring each bite. It wasn't just food. It was dignity. It was power. It was proof that she still existed as something more than a shadow. That night, she slept for 12 hours straight. She slept without being startled, without fear, without cold. The new management, he stated, had made a legal and justified decision to adjust all rents to reflect the current market value. Furthermore, Your Honor, Roger continued, the defendant not only refused to pay the adjusted rent but also accrued 2 months of arrears. While he made a payment under threat of eviction on one occasion, he immediately lapsed back into delinquency. This demonstrates a clear pattern of either inability or unwillingness to meet his contractual obligations. The judge silently reviewed the documents, her gaze then settling on Robert. Mr. Salazar, she inquired, is it correct that you currently owe 2 months' rent under the new terms? Robert stood up with visible effort. Yes, Your Honor, but the increase was so sudden. We simply didn't have enough time to adjust. If you could grant us just a 3-month extension, Dawn began, before the judge cut her off firmly. You received 30 days' notice of the change in terms, which is the legal requirement. You had ample time to either adjust your finances or find alternative accommodation. Do you have the money owed at this time? The judge asked pointedly. Robert looked helplessly at his lawyer, then at Dawn, finally dropping his gaze to the floor. No, Your Honor, not at this moment. Then I have no choice but to rule in favor of the plaintiff, the judge declared. Mr. Salazar, you have 10 days to vacate the property. Failure to do so will result in a forced eviction. Next case, she concluded, the gavel striking the table to mark the swift end of the proceedings. The entire matter had concluded in under 20 minutes. Robert remained rooted to his spot, seemingly unable to grasp the reality of what had just transpired.
Dawn, however, erupted. This is unfair. You can't do this. We have rights. She shouted toward the judge, but her protests were futile. The next case was already being called. I know you said you might not answer, but I needed to try. My heart pounded. Where are you? I asked. In a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy, just a studio, but it's mine. I pay for it with my new job. I'm working in a warehouse night shift. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. I'm paying off my debts little by little. I felt something loosen in my chest. I'm glad to hear that. Mom, I'm not calling to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying. I'm going to therapy every week. I'm working on understanding why I made the decisions I did. Why I let Dawn turn me into someone I don't recognize. That's good, Robert. Really good. There was a pause. Do you think someday, could we maybe get a cup of coffee? It doesn't have to be soon. Whenever you're ready. If you're ever ready. I looked at the roses I had planted, now blooming in coral and yellow tones. I looked at the house I had turned into my sanctuary. I looked at the life I had built from the ashes. Maybe, I finally said. Someday when we are both ready. Okay, I can wait. I've learned to be patient. His voice cracked slightly. I love you, Mom. I know I don't have the right to say it after everything, but it's true. I know, I whispered, and I hung up. I sat on the deck with a cup of tea, letting the morning sun warm my face. I hadn't completely forgiven Robert. Maybe I never would entirely. I had discovered something far more profound than mere forgiveness. I had finally attained a sense of inner peace. I had unearthed my own resilience. I had discovered the power of my own voice. I reached for my notebook and began to write. I realized I could forgive myself for the years I had spent hesitating to stand up for myself. I understood that self-love isn't self-indulgence. It's a fundamental necessity for survival. It's about preserving one's dignity. It serves as the very bedrock upon which we construct our lives. The wind whispered through the leaves of the trees. I looked at my son, begging him with my eyes to choose me, to remember who had raised him, who had spent countless sleepless nights tending to his fevers, who had worked 2 jobs to pay for his college education. But Robert was staring at the floor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, a picture of defeat. I'm sorry, Mom, he finally mumbled. But I think it's better if you find somewhere else to live. This isn't working. You're causing problems. You need to leave. The world stopped. My heart stopped. Everything stopped. You're kicking me out? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Your wife hits me and you kick me out? It's not like that, Mom. It's just that Dawn and I need our space. You need your independence. It'll be better for everyone. He spoke in rehearsed phrases, empty words that someone else had planted in his mouth. My son was no longer there. Only a stranger with his face remained. When? I asked, feeling the sting of tears behind my eyes. Tomorrow morning. I'll call you a taxi. You can stay in a hotel while you find something permanent. I'll help you with some expenses. He was dismissing me as if I were a disgruntled employee. He didn't even have the courage to look me in the eye. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at Henry's photographs, wondering what he would say if he could see me now. I packed my belongings slowly, folding each item with painstaking care, as if external order could somehow contain the internal chaos. At dawn, I heard the blare of the taxi horn. Robert was waiting for me at the door with $200 in his hand. For you to get settled, he said, still unable to meet my gaze. I didn't hug him. I didn't say goodbye. I simply took the money, grabbed my suitcases, and walked out of that house without looking back. The taxi driver asked me where I wanted to go. I had no idea. To any cheap motel, I finally told him. When she woke, the sun was streaming through the curtains and for a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The documents, the money, the properties, her new reality. Over the next few days, Roger took her to see each of her properties, apartment buildings, commercial spaces, even a small shopping center in the southern part of the city.
Each place represented years of Henry's quiet labor, investments made with patience and foresight. He explained the intricacies of each, the rental agreements, the maintenance, the monthly income. Helen listened intently, taking notes like a diligent student. The net income from all your properties totals approximately $45,000 a month, he told her one day as they reviewed reports in his office. After taxes and maintenance, you're looking at an annual income of about $400,000. And that's without touching the principal capital. $400,000 a year, and she had been begging for a bowl of soup at a church. The irony was still biting. But now, something else was emerging. A plan was taking shape in her mind, a cold, calculating, patient plan. "Roger," she said one afternoon, interrupting their review. "I need us to make some changes. But I need them to be done discreetly, without anyone knowing that I'm the one behind them." He leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "What kind of changes?" "First, the building on Magnolia Street. I want to raise my son's rent to the market price, as we discussed. But I also want you to review all the other contracts in that building. If there are any other special arrangements, reduced prices, favors being granted, I want everything returned to normal rates. Everyone, without exception. I want that building to operate like a real business, not a charity organization." Roger nodded, taking notes. "It can be done. Anything else?" "I want to buy new clothes. I want to change my appearance." Their lawyer took Dawn's arm, attempting to escort her out of the courtroom before she could be charged with contempt. Dawn resisted, spewing incoherent accusations of corruption and abuse. Robert followed her in silence, dragging his feet, a picture of utter defeat. They passed my bench without so much as a glance, as if I were just another invisible, irrelevant figure in the room. I watched them until they disappeared from sight. Then, I remained seated for a few moments longer, allowing the reality to sink in. I had won. Legally, formally, I had won. But instead of the euphoria I had anticipated, I felt a profound emptiness, like the aftermath of a devastating storm. I exited the courthouse through a side door, where Roger had said he would be waiting for me at a nearby coffee shop. I found him at a table in the back, 2 cups of coffee already prepared. "Well," he said as I sat down, "it went exactly as planned." "Yes," I replied. "How do you feel?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. "Strange," I finally admitted. "Like I've closed a door, but I'm still unsure of what lies on the other side." Roger nodded understandingly. "What you did today wasn't cruel, Mrs. Mendoza. It was simply fair. Your son made choices that led him here. You merely allowed him to face the natural consequences of those decisions." "I know," I said. "Rationally, I know. But that understanding never changes the way it feels." We drank our coffee in silence. Roger was adept at knowing when silence was more beneficial than words. After a while, he retrieved a folder from his briefcase. "I need to show you something. It arrived this morning, a request from one of your other tenants in the Magnolia building." I opened the folder to find a handwritten letter addressed to Mendoza Enterprises. It was from a woman named Martha Gomez, the tenant of apartment 105. A bird's song echoed from a nearby branch. And I, Helen Salazar, 71 years of age, owner of 13 properties, a survivor who had endured both betrayal and abandonment, a woman who had risen from the depths of her own despair, simply existed, complete, liberated, and utterly my own. He took me to a place on the outskirts of Los Angeles, one of those seedy roadside hotels with a flickering neon sign and carpets that smelled of dampness and stale cigarettes. The room cost $30 a night. I did the math in my head. With $200, I could survive for less than a week. The motel room was tiny, with stained beige walls and a bed that creaked with every movement. A grimy window offered a view of the parking lot, where cars came and went at all hours of the night. The flickering neon sign cast an unsettling reddish glow over everything. I sat on that bed and, for the first time in months, I cried without restraint. They weren't silent tears. They were deep, wrenching sobs that erupted from some dark abyss within my chest. Years of accumulated pain, swallowed humiliations, unspoken words. I cried for Henry, who had left me alone in a world I no longer recognized. I cried for Robert, the little boy who once clung to me and called me his hero. I cried for myself, for the woman I had once been, and who now no longer knew who she was. When the tears finally subsided, only emptiness remained. I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror under the harsh fluorescent light. A 71-year-old woman stared back at me, her face etched with deep wrinkles, her eyes swollen, her gray hair a tangled mess. A purple bruise marred my temple, where the ladle had struck me. I touched the wound gently and realized that the physical pain was almost a relief compared to the other pain, the nameless ache that gnawed at my soul. The days began to blur together. I stayed in the room, watching television without truly seeing it, eating only the bare minimum. I ventured out only to buy something from the vending machine in the hallway, salty chips, instant coffee, granola bars. One day, the machine swallowed my last $2 without dispensing anything. I stood there, watching the money disappear, and felt as if it was a perfect metaphor for my life. And I need a business name, something I can use to sign documents, to appear on contracts. I don't want anyone to know that Helen Salazar is the owner of all this. We can create a legal entity, an LLC. We choose a name, and all documents are signed under that name. You would be the hidden beneficiary. It's perfectly legal and very common in the real estate sector. Perfect. Call it Mendoza Enterprises. Over the next 2 weeks, Helen transformed. She went to beauty salons where her hair was cut and styled, the gray expertly concealed with an elegant shade of brown. She visited boutiques where attentive staff helped her select clothes that fit her perfectly, clothes that made her look like the woman of means she now was. Pearl gray dresses, earth-toned pantsuits, dark green silk blouses, nothing flashy, everything exuding understated class. She bought new glasses with modern frames and learned to apply a touch of makeup to soften the deepest wrinkles. She wasn't becoming someone else. She was unearthing the Helen who had been buried beneath years of silent servitude. Roger tutored her in the intricacies of financial reports, bank statements, and sound business decisions. She learned quickly, discovering a latent talent she never knew she possessed. She had spent 50 years cooking and cleaning, but her mind was sharp, capable, and hungry for knowledge. You have a natural gift for this, Roger observed one day. Your husband chose his investments wisely, but you have an instinct for identifying opportunities. It comes naturally to you. Perhaps it did, perhaps it always had, but no one had ever given her the opportunity to discover it. Henry had been a good man, a loving husband, but even he had kept her in the dark about financial matters, believing he was protecting her. Now, she understood that true power didn't come from being protected, but from possessing the tools to protect herself. She explained that she was a single mother with 2 children, working as a nurse on the night shift, and she had always paid her rent on time. She respectfully requested that we reconsider the rent increase in her case, or at the very least, stagger the increase over several months. She included copies of her payment receipts, proof of income, and letters of reference from her employer. I read the letter twice. What do you think? I asked Roger. It's your decision, he replied. Legally, you are under no obligation to make exceptions, but this woman seems genuine, and her payment history is impeccable. I thought about Martha Gomez, a stranger to me, working night shifts to provide for her children. I remembered the many times I had been in a similar position, pleading for a little consideration, a little grace. Accept her proposal, I said. Stagger the increase over 6 months, and tell her that if she continues to pay on time, we'll consider keeping her rent below market permanently. Roger smiled slightly. That is very generous. It's not generosity, I corrected. It's recognizing the difference between someone who is genuinely struggling and someone who is simply evading responsibility. I signed the approval right there. It was a line I had decided to draw. I would be firm with those who had wronged me, with those who abused unearned privileges. But I would not become the kind of person who ignores real suffering. I would not become Dawn. The following days were fraught with tension. Roger informed me of Robert's desperate attempts to overturn the court's decision.
He had appealed the ruling, which would only delay the inevitable by a week. He had tried to secure additional loans, but his credit was already ruined. He had even posted ads to sell his furniture, electronics, anything of value. The appeal was rejected within 3 days. The appeals judge didn't even deem a hearing necessary, simply reviewing the documents and upholding the original ruling. I sent text messages to Robert. At first, I tried to maintain a semblance of dignity. "Son, I need to talk to you." "Nothing." Then I tried to be more direct. "Robert, I'm running out of money." Silence. Finally, I gave up trying. The messages were marked as read, but there was never a response. It was like shouting into a bottomless pit. A week later, the money ran out. The motel receptionist, a man in his 40s with a prominent belly and weary eyes, knocked on my door. "Ma'am, I need you to pay or vacate the room." His voice wasn't cruel, just professional, indifferent. I explained my situation, begged for just one more day, but he simply shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Those are the rules." I packed my suitcases once again, those 4 suitcases that now felt like they weighed as much as corpses. I dragged them through the parking lot under a scorching sun, not knowing where to go. I walked for hours. My feet ached. My hands were blistered from carrying so much weight. But I kept going because stopping meant accepting that I had nowhere left to go. I eventually ended up in a park near downtown Los Angeles. There were metal benches shaded by trees, pigeons pecking at crumbs, children playing on the swings. I sat down on a secluded bench and watched life go on around me, as if I didn't even exist. A woman walked past with her young daughter. The little girl looked at me with curiosity, but her mother quickly pulled her away and hurried her along, as if poverty were contagious. That was my first night sleeping on the street. I didn't really sleep. I stayed seated, clutching my purse tightly, startled by every noise. There were other homeless people in the park, mostly men, huddled under cardboard boxes. One of them approached me and offered me a piece of stale bread. "Eat it, Grandma. You gotta be careful out here." I took the bread with trembling hands and thanked him. He nodded and shuffled away, dragging a bag full of aluminum cans. The rent increase notices were dispatched to all tenants in the Magnolia Street building, bearing the name Mendoza Enterprises and legally represented by the Mendes and Associates law firm. The increases were justified within the bounds of the law, but they were substantial, particularly for those who had been enjoying reduced rates for years. Roger kept her apprised of the reactions. Some tenants called in a fury. Others attempted to negotiate. "There's one apartment in particular that has called 7 times, he reported one afternoon. Apartment 301, a Robert Salazar. He claims he had a special contract with a former owner and that this must be a mistake." "It's not a mistake," Helen replied calmly. "Inform him that the special contract expired with the death of Mr. Henry Salazar. He must now pay the full rate or vacate the premises. He's asking to speak with the owner directly. Tell him the owner is unavailable. All communications must go through you." Days passed. Roger continued to update her. "Mr. Salazar is trying to secure a loan to cover the new rent. Apparently, he and his wife have been living beyond their means. They have significant credit card debt and a heavily financed car. This rent increase is putting a considerable strain on their finances." "Good." The word escaped her lips, devoid of emotion. She felt no satisfaction, exactly, but neither did she feel guilt. She was witnessing the natural consequences of Robert's choices. He had chosen a wife who spent more than they earned. He had chosen to live a life of luxury that he could only afford because of his father's generosity. He had chosen to cast his own mother out into the street. Now he was reaping what he had sown. But she wasn't finished. There were other strings to pull, other levers to move. Dawn worked as an independent consultant from home. Robert now had less than a week to vacate the apartment. According to the private investigator who was still monitoring the situation, Robert and Dawn had begun packing, but their arguments had become increasingly heated. Neighbors report shouting every night, the investigator informed me by phone. Yesterday, Dawn left the building with 2 suitcases and took a taxi. She hasn't returned. Apparently, she's staying with a friend. Robert is still there alone, packing. One of the neighbors says they saw him crying in the hallway last night while carrying boxes to the elevator. The image struck me harder than I had anticipated. My son, alone and weeping, packing up the remnants of his life. But I didn't call. I didn't intervene. This had to happen. He needed to reach this breaking point. 2 days before the eviction deadline, Roger received an unexpected call. It was Robert, he told me when we met that afternoon. He wants to speak with the building owner. He says he has something important to say. He's begging for a meeting. What did you tell him? I asked. That I would relay the message. He wants to see you. The unspoken question hung in the air between us. Did I want to see my son? Did I want to hear what he had to say? A part of me, the maternal instinct that had never completely disappeared, screamed, yes. But another part, the wiser, more cautious part, had doubts. Do you know what he wants to say? I asked. No. Only that it's important, that he needs to explain something. I considered the situation for a long minute. Tell him I will agree to see him, but not as his mother, as the representative of Mendoza Enterprises. And it has to be in a neutral place, your office, tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Roger nodded. Does he want me to be present? No, I have to do this alone. That night, sleep eluded me. I mentally rehearsed what I would say, how I would react. The days devolved into a desperate routine for survival. I searched for food in the dumpsters behind restaurants. At first, I was disgusted, overcome with shame. But hunger is a powerful force, stronger even than pride. I found day-old bread, bruised fruit, and scraps of leftovers that people had scraped from their plates. I ate hidden in alleyways where no one could see me. There was a church a few blocks away that served soup on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I lined up with dozens of other people, all bearing the visible scars of their broken stories. A young volunteer served me a bowl with a compassionate smile that only made me feel even smaller. God bless you, she said. I just nodded, unable to form any words. The nights were the worst. Cold, long, and filled with constant fear. I lay on the bench with my suitcases piled around me, using my sweater as a makeshift blanket. I heard distant sirens, occasional shouts, the relentless hum of the city that never slept. I thought of Robert, lying in his comfortable bed in his centrally heated house, while I shivered beneath the cold, indifferent stars. I wondered if he ever thought of me, if he cared, if he even knew that his mother was sleeping on the streets. One morning, a police officer woke me with his flashlight. Ma'am, you can't stay here. You have to move along. I explained that I had nowhere else to go. He sighed, clearly weary of hearing stories like mine. There's a shelter 6 blocks away. Go there. He gave me the address and walked away. I tried to go, but the shelter was always full. Come back early tomorrow, they told me. Always tomorrow. Always wait. Never now. 2 weeks passed like this, or maybe it was 3. I lost track of time. The days bled into a haze of exhaustion and hopelessness. My clothes were filthy, my hair greasy, my skin covered in grime. I had become one of those invisible people that everyone avoided looking at, a statistic, a mere shadow. Helen, through resources provided by Roger, conducted a discreet investigation and discovered that one of Dawn's primary clients rented space in another of her properties, the South Commercial Plaza. Roger, this client that rents Unit 203 at the South Plaza, what are they paying? He consulted his files. $2,200 a month. It's a large space. A good, reliable business. They always pay on time. Raise their rent to $3,500. That is a very significant increase, Mrs. Salazar. They may decide to relocate. Then let them move. It's my property, and I intend to charge what it's worth. The client in Unit 203 didn't move, but they did make cuts to their operating expenses. One of the first things to go was their contracts with external consultants, including Dawn. Roger informed her almost casually during one of their weekly meetings. By the way, it seems your strategy is having some side effects. The business at the South Plaza canceled several vendor contracts. One of them was with Dawn Salazar, your daughter-in-law. Helen remained silent, simply nodding and continuing to review the other documents. But inwardly, She felt something akin to satisfaction. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was justice. It was the universe realigning itself, removing unearned privileges, balancing the scales. Weeks turned into months. She continued to live in the hotel, studying, learning, transforming. She enrolled in an online course on property management and devoured books on personal finance that she had never had time for before. She met with other property owners that Roger knew, listening to their experiences, absorbing their insights. One afternoon, while she was enjoying coffee on the hotel terrace, Roger called her with some news. "Mrs. Salazar, there is a situation you need to know about. Your son, Robert, has requested a hearing with the building's management. He is now 2 months behind on his rent. Under standard policies, we have the right to initiate eviction proceedings." I stood in front of the mirror, practicing maintaining a neutral, firm expression, determined not to betray any emotion. I had to be strong. I couldn't allow Robert to see the desperate mother longing for his love. He had to see the businesswoman I had become. At 2 o'clock the next afternoon, I arrived at the law firm. Roger had given me the use of his private office. I sat behind the desk in the black leather chair, the case documents spread out before me. I was dressed impeccably, a charcoal gray pantsuit, a cream-colored blouse, my hair perfectly styled, and subtle but definitive makeup. I didn't look like Helen anymore. I looked like Mrs. Mendoza. At exactly 3 o'clock, I heard voices in the reception area. My heart began to race. The door opened and Robert entered alone. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me. For what seemed like an eternity, we stared at each other in silence. I watched his brain process what his eyes were seeing, confusion, then disbelief, and finally, absolute shock. "Mom," he whispered, as if he were seeing a ghost. "Sit down, Robert." My voice was cold, controlled. It wasn't the voice of a mother. It was the voice of an owner. He stumbled toward the chair in front of the desk, unable to break eye contact. "No, I don't understand. What are you doing here? Why are you dressed like this? Where have you been? I looked for you, Mom. I called you. I sent you messages."
Lies.
The word cut through the air like a knife. I checked my messages. 0 calls, 0 messages. After kicking me out of your house, you never contacted me again. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes welled up with tears. Dawn said it was better to give you space, that you were angry, that with time. Dawn said, I repeated with an icy tone. "Robert, since when did you let your wife make decisions about your relationship with your mother?" It wasn't like that. Things were complicated.
Money. Work.
Dawn was stressed. But in the midst of all that suffering, something unexpected happened. I started to remember things I had forgotten. That before I married Henry, I had dreamed of studying literature, that I had once won a poetry contest in school, that there had been a time when I had my own aspirations and dreams before becoming a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a shadow. One afternoon, while rummaging through my suitcases for a clean piece of clothing, I found an envelope that I didn't even remember packing. It was old, yellowed, with my name written in Henry's unmistakable handwriting. My heart skipped a beat. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter and several folded documents. The letter began with, "My dearest Helen." I immediately recognized when he had written it. It was from 2 years earlier, when Henry had been briefly hospitalized with pneumonia. I'd thought it was just a scare, but now I understood that he had been contemplating his own mortality. "If you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you," the letter continued. "Forgive me for not telling you everything while I was alive. I always wanted to shield you from the worries of money, of business, of legal complexities, but now I realize it was a mistake to keep you in the dark." My eyes filled with tears as I read. Henry's voice resonated in every word. For the last 30 years, I have been making investments, small at first, then larger. I bought properties when no one else wanted them, in neighborhoods that later became valuable. I saved every extra penny. I did it all thinking about our future, about your security. I never told you because I didn't want you to worry. I wanted to surprise you in our old age with a peace of mind of knowing that you would be well taken care of. My breathing grew rapid. I unfolded the documents that accompanied the letter. Deeds, property titles, investment certificates. My eyes scanned the papers, unable to believe what they were seeing. How much does he owe? $5,000 in total, plus late payment fees. A grand total of $6,200. $6,200, she repeated. She could pay it with the money she had in her purse at that very moment. Proceed with the eviction, following all legal protocols. Of course. Are you certain? Once we begin, the process is public. It will be filed with the courts, and it will appear on his credit history. I am completely certain. That night, she found herself unable to sleep, not out of guilt or regret, but from a complex mix of emotions that she couldn't quite decipher. She stood before the bathroom mirror, gazing at the woman who stared back. She no longer resembled the woman who had arrived at Roger's office 2 months prior. This woman held her shoulders straight, possessed a firm gaze, and her jaw was set with determination. This woman didn't beg. She didn't apologize for her existence. This woman collected what she was owed. The following days were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Roger kept her informed of every step. The eviction notice was delivered. Robert had 30 days to settle the full debt or vacate the apartment. According to Roger, her son had been calling the firm every day, sometimes multiple times a day, demanding to speak with the owner, pleading for extensions and offering payment plans. What did you tell him? She asked. Exactly what you instructed me to. That all policies apply equally to all tenants. That there are no exceptions. That if he cannot pay, he must leave. Perfect. But there was something else Roger didn't know, something she had been investigating independently. She had engaged a private investigator, not to spy, but to understand. She needed to know how her son had reached this point. She needed to understand what had become of the boy she had raised. The report arrived a week later, and it was even more disheartening than she had anticipated. Robert earned a decent salary as a sales manager, but Don spent 3 times as much. And it was easier to forget about me than to deal with your wife. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He lowered his gaze, unable to deny it. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Robert looked up, and I saw a different expression in his eyes, a question forming. Mom, what are you doing here in this office dressed like this? Why did the lawyer let you use his office? I took a deep breath. This was the moment. I'm not using his office, Robert. He lent it to me because I am his client. I am Mendoza Enterprises. The color drained from his face. What? The building where you live? The other 12 buildings in the city, the investments, the money, it's all yours? Your father left it to me. It was always mine. And you have been paying rent to live on my property? Robert stood up so abruptly that the chair almost fell over. No, that's not possible. Dad never mentioned. Why didn't you say anything? Why would I have said anything? My voice rose slightly, allowing a fraction of the contained anger to surface. So you and Dawn could treat me like your landlady in addition to your maid? So you could ask for more favors, more discounts, more special considerations? We didn't know, he shouted. If we had known that you... What? I interrupted him, standing up as well. Would you have treated me better? Would you have respected me more? Robert, respect shouldn't depend on how much money someone has. I was your mother. That should have been enough. He sank back into the chair, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. He was crying. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry, Mom.
I was a coward. I let Dawn treat you badly. I let her kick you out. I turned up the television when she was hurting you because I didn't want to confront her, because it was easier to sacrifice you than risk my marriage. An apartment building downtown. Another one in the northern part of the city. Company stocks, bank accounts with numbers that seemed impossible. My hands were shaking so violently that the papers nearly slipped from my grasp. I read each document once, twice, 3 times, desperately trying to process the information. There were 13 properties in my name. 13. Entire buildings, apartments, commercial spaces. And one of those addresses was chillingly familiar. Magnolia Street, number 452. It was the building where Robert and Dawn lived,
The building from which I had been kicked out, where I had been humiliated, assaulted, and discarded like a piece of trash. It had been mine all along. I felt a strange churning in my stomach. It wasn't just surprise. It was a mixture of disbelief, pain, and something darker, something that was slowly beginning to take root and grow. Henry's letter continued on the second page. Contact the lawyer, Roger Mendes. He has all the original documents and will help you with everything. His number is at the end of this letter. Helen, my love, never let anyone make you feel less than you are. You are a strong, capable, and valuable woman. If someone treats you badly, remember that you have the power to defend yourself. I loved you every day of my life. Take care, your Henry. They had maxed out credit cards, personal loans to cover other loans, meals at expensive restaurants 5 times a week, designer clothes she wore once and forgot in the closet, a lifestyle built entirely on debt and appearances. The investigator had also included notes on their relationship. They had engaged in public arguments, and neighbors reported frequent shouting, doors slamming, and tense silences. Dawn blamed Robert for not earning enough, and Robert blamed Dawn for spending too much. It was a vicious cycle of resentment and recrimination. Helen read the entire report twice. A part of her, the part that was still a mother, yearned to intervene. She wanted to call Robert, offer him assistance, and steer him toward better decisions. But the other part, the newer, stronger part, recognized that it would be a mistake. Robert needed to hit rock bottom. He needed to confront the consequences of his choices. Only then could he grow. Besides, he had let her hit rock bottom. He had witnessed her on his kitchen floor, bleeding and humiliated, and he had simply turned up the television volume. He had kicked her out onto the street with $200 and a vague promise of help. He hadn't called to see if she was still alive. He hadn't inquired if she had a place to sleep. He hadn't cared. The words I had waited months to hear had finally come out of his mouth, but instead of the satisfaction I had expected, I only felt exhausted. And now, Robert, do you only feel sorry because you discovered I have money? Because I own the building where you live? Would you have come to apologize if you still thought I was a poor, old woman with no resources? He looked up, his face streaked with tears. I don't know, he admitted, his voice breaking. I don't know, Mom. And that's the worst part. I don't know what kind of person I became. I don't recognize the man who did those things, who left his mother on the street, who chose comfort over decency. At least he was honest. That was something. I sat down again, calmer. Your marriage is falling apart, isn't it? He nodded miserably. Dawn left 3 days ago. She says she won't stay with a loser who can't even pay the rent. She says she deserves better. That all this is my fault.
And what do you think?
I think she's right. I think I am a loser. I lost my job 2 weeks ago. I was fired for being constantly late, for being distracted, for the stress. I have debts of over $40,000. My credit is ruined, and in 2 days, I'm going to be homeless. It's ironic, isn't it? I left you homeless, and now I'm in the same situation. It's not ironic, I said softly. It's karma. He looked at me with red, swollen eyes. Have you come to watch me suffer? Is that what you wanted? Revenge? The question stopped me in my tracks.